So let's talk about the three different types of commonly used backups within SQL Server. So the three basic types are the full backup, the differential backup, that some folks call this an incremental backup, and the transaction log backup. And two of these three are copy based, and one is the way that you really ensure your ability to recover, right? They all interact and are dependent to some extent. So your full backup is basically a copy block for block, exactly what it looks like on the storage. And this is an important distinction to understand what the database looks like as it's stored. And I've made a backup of it. Now I'm allowed to use compression in that backup, and it still maintains that capability of duplicating the database as it's stored. So for example, if you had a database and the size of your database that you had allocated on the disk was, let's say, 500 gigabytes, and it only had 250 gigabytes worth of used space in it, right? And you do a backup, a full backup of the database, and restore it, the restore that you have is going to also come out as a 500 gigabyte database file, right, with 250 gigabytes of used space in the exact same places and emptiness on the file that it was before. And that's important because it allows you to take a backup of your database and test it for corruption. The differential backup looks back to the full backup and says, I want to copy any of the pieces of data that changed, right, from the full backup until now. And if I want to restore my full backup, what it does is it will restore that copy of the full, like we just talked about. And then the differential backup will say, okay, now go in and make these exact changes to the data and just dole them out where they're supposed to be. If you have corruption, you're still going to see it from the differential, right? Because you're still copying the data as it appears. And that's where things get interesting. We have then the third type of backup, and this is called the transaction log backup. Every operation that changes something in SQL Server is stored as a transaction. If you're just reading data, that's generally not considered transaction, right? Because you're not going to affect a change. But every other change that you make, right, I need to keep track of it and make sure that I'm able to recover it. And this is what transaction logs do. They enable us to get to this point in time recovery. And the interesting difference between a transaction log backup and a full and a differential backup is that the transaction log backup isn't storing the data. I mean, it does to a point, but what it's storing is what operation you did to make the change, right? So you're telling the transaction log, I updated this table and I changed 100 rows from X to Y, and this is their new value.